The best outboard deals rarely announce themselves. They show up quietly, tucked into Black Friday promotions, while everyone else is hunting for electronics and appliances. This year, we are hinting at serious savings, from portable kickers to big offshore muscle. Let's break down the 7 categories where the smartest money will move first. 7 types of Black Friday outboard deals that actually make sense in the real world. What they usually look like, who they are perfect for, and what fine print can quietly turn a bargain into a headache. Number 7. Honda F200. The smallest boats often cling to the oldest habits. A dinghy that has always been rowed tends to stay that way. The inflatable that came with a pair of oars keeps being good enough, even as people groan every time they cross a windy harbor. At a lakeside cabin, that light aluminum boat spends more time drifting sideways than going where anyone intends. None of this happens because people love rowing. It happens because the jump to an outboard has always looked like a luxury, another thing to maintain. Another expense that can be delayed one more season. Rows are free, after all, and there is a certain pride in doing things the hard way. The little 4-stroke portable from Honda quietly erases that logic. Air cooling removes the fear of sand and weeds clogging a water pump. The built-in fuel tank means you do not have to drag a separate can up and down a dock. The centrifugal clutch keeps things simple. At idle, the propeller rests, twist the throttle, and the boat moves. Even someone who has never held a tiller before can understand the controls in a few seconds. Black Friday rarely turns this motor into a giveaway, but it does something more important. It nudges the price just far enough that an owner who has been on the fence suddenly feels comfortable. Maybe shipping becomes free. Maybe a dealer includes oil and a stand. Maybe last year's units are marked down a modest but meaningful amount. The decision shifts from someday to why not now. On the water, the difference is out of proportion to the horsepower. A dinghy that used to fight the wind now cuts across a harbor calmly. An inflatable that lived rolled in a garage finally sees the lake. The boat is still small, still simple, but it becomes a reliable tool instead of a reluctant chore. There are still details worth checking. Shaft length must match the transom height so the propeller is buried properly. The engine should be recent enough that parts support and warranty are clear. And the seller should be able to tell you whether the warranty starts at registration or at some earlier date. Once those questions are answered, people who have rowed for years often wonder why they waited. And that small taste of convenience opens the door to a different desire, one that trades noise and fumes for something calmer and more modern, especially on quiet lakes and harbors. Number 6. Torqeedo Travel 1103C. There is a particular moment on the water when quiet becomes the only thing that matters. Early morning fog, a glassy evening surface, children asleep in the cabin while someone rows or paddles gently. These are the times when a petrol engine feels out of place, no matter how small it is. Electric propulsion has been chasing that moment for years. At first, it was mostly theory and promise. Then, slowly, certain designs started to prove that they were more than science experiments. Lightweight packaging, efficient propellers, useful range numbers instead of wishful thinking. The compact electric outboard from Torqeedo sits right at that point where electric stops, feeling like a gadget and starts feeling like real boating equipment. The removable battery clicks into place on top of the shaft. The display shows remaining range, power draw, and speed in a way that makes instant, practical sense. The throttle feels like something from modern industry rather than a toy. For a dinghy, a day sailor, or a small car-top skiff, the experience can be quietly startling. There is no choke, no pull cord, no warm-up ritual. You step aboard, press a button, and ease the throttle forward. The only sounds are water moving past the hull and the faint hum of the motor. For people who have spent their lives hearing small petrol engines shout over every conversation, the absence of that racket feels almost luxurious. Black Friday is one of the few times when the total package cost moves into realistic territory for more owners. The motor and battery bundle might drop by a few hundred. A carrying bag or spare propeller might be included as part of a seasonal promotion. In some regions, older stock batteries are discounted enough that buying an extra suddenly makes sense. Still, this is not a magic wand. Range is generous for tenders and short hops, but it is not infinite. A heavily loaded boat or strong headwind eats into the comfort margin quickly. Charging requires access to power that is not always convenient at remote docks or shorelines. And for people who must cover miles against current, petrol power remains safer and more practical. Yet even with these caveats, electric ownership changes how people think about time on the water. Short errands become silent. Children learn to steer without the smell of exhaust. Late-night returns to a mooring feel less intrusive. For many, the next step is not a bigger electric, but a return to petrol with new expectations. They want a small engine that is as reliable as a battery, yet still capable of pushing heavier boats in tougher conditions. That is where the next motor earns its place. Pause for a moment before pulling the trigger on a Black Friday engine. Share the details of your setup in the comments, your boat's length, how it is used, the waters you run, and the motor you are thinking about. That information reveals fit or mismatch faster than any horsepower chart ever will. If you want more straight, practical guidance without the sales gloss, tap like and subscribe. Number 5. Mercury FourStroke 9.9 with electronic fuel injection. Remote rivers and shallow backwater places have a way of exposing weaknesses in any outboard. They are the great equalizers. Nothing looks glamorous when you are launching at dawn on a muddy bank in temperatures that make metal ring. Boats do not glide off bunks so much as they scrape their way into the current. Everyone has a job, everything is wet, and the motor becomes the one piece of equipment that absolutely has to behave. In those moments, nobody cares about sleek cowling lines or glossy marketing photos. They care about whether the engine will fire in the cold, idle without coughing, and push a loaded hull through water that barely covers the propeller. That is where this small four-stroke makes its case. The twin-cylinder layout is not about speed, it is about predictability. It gives the engine a rhythm that steadies itself even when conditions are not ideal. The electronic fuel injection replaces the unreliable dance of choke knobs and half-pulled cords that older motors demanded. Instead of fiddling and feathering the throttle on cold mornings, owners can simply turn a key or pull the starter and expect the motor to find its footing on its own. That consistency matters more than raw power in real-world river work. The tiller handle also earns its praise the hard way. When you are picking through stumps, winding between patches of reeds, or skimming above gravel bars, steering has to be instinctive. The leverage built into the tiller helps the operator correct quickly, but without feeling twitchy. This makes a difference when you have a dog shifting around or a partner leaning over the gunnel pulling decoys. Likewise, a smooth but confident gear detent prevents accidental slams into forward or reverse when navigating tight spots around docks and ramps. Black Friday incentives for engines like this rarely hit the front pages of dealer ads, but they show up where it counts. Dealers often discount manual start short shaft models because they want minimal leftover winter stock in that configuration. That can mean a few $100s saved on a model that almost never gets cheaper in peak season. For someone who has limped along with an old smoky two-stroke hoping it will fire every time they push off, that modest discount carries real meaning. It offers a way out of another year of uncertainty. Once mounted, the difference can feel disproportionate to the horsepower. A John boat that used to hesitate, stall, or lose prime at the worst times suddenly feels trustworthy. You stop strategizing around whether the engine will start and begin planning your day based on the weather and the game, which is how it should be. That confidence leads to more spontaneous trips, short scouting runs before work, quick evening checks on blinds, or early spring chores that used to require a full morning of preparation. Still, this engine has limits. A 9.9 horsepower motor will not overpower fast current or heavy loads. It requires respect, not blind faith. matching the shaft length to the transom, choosing the right propeller pitch, and understanding how weight shifts in a small hull will determine how safely and effectively the engine performs. Owners who get those details right often find themselves reconsidering their primary boats next. Because if a small outboard can improve life this much, what would a well-matched mid-range engine do? That question usually leads straight to the 60 horsepower class, where modest hulls finally begin to feel alive. Number 4. Mercury FourStroke 60. There is a pattern that repeats itself across boat ramps everywhere. A 16 or 17 or 18-foot hull looks sensible on paper. The layout works. The storage is fine. The hull design is proven. But on the water, loaded with people and gear, the whole package feels dull. Slow to plane. Reluctant to turn. Always needing more throttle than you expected. Often, the fault is not in the hull, but in the motor bolted to the transom. An older two-stroke or an undersized four-stroke may have been good enough when the boat was new, but years of added equipment and changing expectations have quietly outgrown it. A modern 60 horsepower four-stroke in the right configuration often feels like a revelation. The chorus of mechanical clatter at idle fades into a softer hum. The push as the boat climbs onto plane feels clean and confident. Mid-range cruise becomes calmer, both in sound and in the way the hull rides. Black Friday is especially interesting for engines in this range, because dealers sell so many of them. They power pontoons, aluminum fishing rigs, rental fleets, and small center consoles. That volume means there are usually a few units that must leave inventory before the new model year arrives in force. Discounts appear as straightforward price cuts, rigging bundles, reduced installation labor, or extended protection plans attached to specific serial numbers. For a family staring at a quote, the difference between a full-priced mid-range outboard and a slightly discounted one can be the difference between waiting another year or finally repowering. Once installed, the perception of the boat changes overnight. The same hull that felt tired and reluctant suddenly jumps forward with a little authority. Long runs to the far side of the lake feel shorter. Towing a tube or a small wakeboard no longer strains nerves and equipment. There are questions worth asking before signing anything. Does the quoted price include controls, gauges, and basic rigging hardware? Is the existing transom height appropriate for the new engine? Are there any promotions that add years of factory-backed protection if the purchase happens within a specific window? Once those details align, a well-matched 60 horsepower engine often becomes the new normal for mid-size boats. Yet again, it is only a step. For some owners, especially those whose boats live on larger lakes or coastal bays, the idea of still more capability starts to form. That path points directly at the 115 horsepower class. Number 3. Suzuki DF-115. When a boat crosses into the 19 to 21 foot range, everything gets more serious. Fuel tanks grow. Cabins or consoles expand. Pontoons lengthen. Loads increase as families and groups of friends join in. Trips shift from simple afternoon cruises to full-day outings or long runs between distant ramps and marinas. In that space, underpowering a boat is an expensive mistake. An engine that struggles to lift a loaded hull onto plane forces everyone aboard to compromise. Speeds stay lower than expected. Fuel consumption rises. People blame the boat, when in reality, the engine is the weak link. A modern 115 horsepower four-stroke with a 2-liter block often slots into this gap perfectly. It brings enough low-end strength to lift real weight, but remains efficient at sensible cruising speeds. On many hulls, it hits the sweet spot between performance and fuel economy in a way that feels natural rather than dramatic. Black Friday tends to reveal its value in quieter ways here. A dealer might shave a solid amount off the price of a leftover model year. Another might include digital gauge packages at a discount. Extended warranties become especially appealing for owners who expect to rack up serious hours each season. Each of these pieces takes a repower or new boat package from one day to we should genuinely talk about this now. On the water, the difference between a tired older engine and a fresh 115 can be startling. The boat climbs onto plane sooner and stays there at lower throttle. Crossing a choppy fetch becomes less of a fight, because the hull has the authority to ride on top rather than plow through. Fuel stops stretch farther apart. And the engine note at cruising speeds becomes something you can talk over without raising your voice. As owners begin to trust this new capability, their sense of distance changes. Spots that once felt too far for a comfortable run become routine destinations. They start thinking about larger bays, open stretches of river, and even nearshore saltwater. At that point, the idea of stepping into the 200 horsepower class no longer sounds extravagant. It sounds like the logical next move for a hull that deserves it. Number 2. Yamaha F200. There is a specific sound an offshore-capable boat makes when a modern four-stroke in the 200 horsepower class idles at the dock. It is not loud, it is not flashy. It is a deep, steady tone that hints at a reserve of force waiting behind the throttle. It says, the boat is prepared for more than protected coves and glassy lakes. This inline-4 version from Yamaha has become a common sight on transoms for good reason. The 2.8-liter displacement, dual overhead camshafts, and 16 valves work together to make strong, reliable power without the mass of a larger 6-cylinder design. That balance allows many hulls to carry serious capability without feeling stern, heavy, or clumsy. For Black Friday, the interesting part is how manufacturers and dealers think. They know that nobody buys an engine in this class casually. Each sale moves significant revenue in a single transaction. That reality creates room for targeted incentives. Rigging credits that help cover modern digital controls. Extended protection plans that stretch across multiple seasons of hard use. Selective discounts on engines that have lived a little too long in inventory because color, shaft length, or rotation direction did not match previous buyers. Boat owners considering this engine usually have specific goals. They want to run out to reefs or offshore structure. They want to cross large, open lakes that can turn ugly when the wind shifts. They may tow larger groups or heavier toys. They need an engine that will start every time, push through adverse conditions, and settle into an efficient, repeatable cruise. Before committing, there are important questions. How will weight distribution change? Is the hull rated appropriately on its capacity plate? Will the existing steering system work? Or is a new integrated setup part of the plan? Are there fuel system upgrades needed to match modern injection standards? Careful answers here make the difference between a transformation and an overreach. When everything lines up, though, stepping into this class of power can reset what normal boating feels like. Long runs that once felt risky become ordinary. Weather windows widen slightly. Family and crew feel more at ease, not because they are taking bigger risks, but because the boat finally matches the conditions in which they want to travel. Even here, however, the very best Black Friday deals do not always show up on the engines most obviously linked to offshore runs. They often hide one step down the power ladder in a motor that serves more boats than almost any other. Number 1. Mercury FourStroke 150. Some engines build their reputation not through flashy numbers on a brochure, but through thousands of hours on real boats that face real conditions. The 3-liter four-stroke from Mercury in the 150 horsepower class is one of those engines. It shows up everywhere, bolted to the transoms of center consoles that fish 2 or 3 times a week, rigged on tri-tunes that carry full families across big lakes, powering bay boats that see both salt and freshwater, and even working on lighter offshore hulls that push out toward reefs and shoals. You can walk almost any marina or ramp in the country and find one still running smoothly after years of use. Owners tend to describe the engine in practical terms. They talk about its torque, which feels generous and immediate even when the boat is heavy. They mention its weight, which is modest compared to some engines with similar displacement, making it easier to balance hulls that dislike stern heaviness. The alternator output earns consistent praise because it keeps batteries healthy during long days of electronics use, something increasingly important as boats carry more screens, pumps, and accessories. Most importantly, owners comment on how the engine seems perfectly comfortable running long hours without strain. Mechanics often highlight a different angle. They appreciate how the internal layout strikes a workable balance between sophistication and service access. Routine tasks like spark plugs, filters, or belt inspections are manageable without needing to dismantle half the motor. Dealers, for their part, value how easily the engine slips into a wide range of packages. It does not overwhelm smaller hulls when rigged correctly, and it does not under-deliver on boats that need solid mid-range strength. Black Friday has a way of creating quiet openings for engines like this. Because the 150 horsepower four-stroke appears in so many applications, there are often a few units in each region that belong to the previous model year, or that were used briefly for demonstrations or sea trials. Sometimes a package boat changes direction, leaving a fully rigged but unused engine waiting for a new home. These are not worn-out leftovers. They are engines that simply fell out of sync with the seasonal sales cycle. For buyers willing to ask the right questions, this becomes a rare advantage. Inquire about prior year inventory. Ask whether any engines were mounted only for test runs. Find out if there are slower moving shaft lengths or colors sitting in storage. When a dealer answers yes, the negotiation shifts immediately. Prices on these motors can move more than advertised promotions imply. Warranty clocks usually start at registration, not manufacture date. Rigging components may be discounted. Dealers hoping to clear their racks before deep winter often become more flexible than they ever would be in spring. If the buyer verifies the engine hours on the display, confirms that all factory updates are complete, and secures warranty terms in writing, a lightly aged 150 becomes one of the smartest Black Friday purchases available. It is not a gamble. It is a practical correction, a chance to give a boat the engine it truly needed all along. That was 7 real engines worth watching as Black Friday closes in, from the tiny outboard that finally puts an end to rowing, to the 150 horsepower workhorse that dealers quietly want off the books. These are not concepts or wish lists. They're sitting in crates, on stands, and under covers right now. Engines that could change how your boat moves, without overcomplicating your season. But the new market is only half the picture. If you've ever wondered whether that used outboard in your local classifieds still has good years left, the next chapter is where that gets real. Tap like, subscribe if you have not already, and if you've seen a deal or dodged one, tell us in the comments. That's how this all gets smarter.